Nope. Passover is going on for until next Monday.
Okay.
But I had our second Seder last night, 31 people with a Haggadah, a script that I created this year, as many rabbis have, with additional, because of the extraordinary in which we're living.
So tell us.
My wife made an extraordinary table, and
so for people unfamiliar, tell us what. Give us a rundown of a typical Passover, and then talk about how you modified it this year.
Okay. There was a unique Passover in Scripture. The unique Passover was the night that prepared for the Exodus. The word Pasach means to pass over, and that involves the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn Egyptians. And a lamb was slaughtered exactly at dusk, at eventide, according to Scripture. And each family was told to take a lamb, a yearling, slaughter it, use its blood on the lintel where today we put mezuzot, the symbol of a Jewish home, and the Malach HaMavet, the messenger of death, would see that sign and Pasach, pass over, not striking that house. On the day of the first Seder, I am a firstborn, I fast in commemoration of the firstborn who were saved. But there is only one unique Passover. Everything else is the telling of the stories called a Seder meal. And the word Seder means ordered. You follow an exact described order. There is a reason to believe that the room above, where Jesus and his disciples had their last meal, that was the beginnings, had elements of what would become a Seder.
Mm-hmm.
At the time of Jesus in the intertestamental period, there was no set order yet. The Haggadah, the book that you follow at the Seder, took 8 centuries to create. We don't have a complete Haggadah until the beginning of the 9th century of the Common Era. The Haggadah is the most adapted, most changed liturgical text in Jewish history. And attending a Passover Seder, which occurs on the first night, the night it begins. So that was Monday night.
Mm-hmm.
Monday was the first holy day of Passover, services in the synagogue. Tuesday night, the second night, it is common for there to be second Seders.
Okay.
In our family, we go to family the first night, and I do a second Seder, gathering an eclectic range. In my home in Minneapolis, I had Christian clergy. Our friend Tony attended many of my Seders, Palestinians, students, non-Jews. It is a way, one of the best ways, to create sharing the story, because it is this story that has informed so much liberation theology.
Mm-hmm.
It was this story that even informed the Puritans when they came to America. So you follow an order, you bless 4 cups of wine or grape juice, you use a Passover plate on which there are symbols of the Passover, matzah, the unleavened bread, the cracker like wafer, a roasted shank bone from a lamb. Jews do not, as a matter of course, eat lamb, but we have a symbol of the roasted lamb. We have parsley, because in the Northern Hemisphere, this is a spring festival. It was the first agricultural festival of a solar seasonal calendar. We dip the parsley in salt water to remember the tears of the Hebrews as slaves. Bitter herbs, lots of different definition of what bitter herbs, symbolic of the bitterness of being slaves. Horseradish root, endive lettuce, depends on where you live and the nature of the culture. Ashkenazi, Central Eastern European, Sephardi, Western European, Mediterranean. A combination of fruits made with cinnamon, wine, charoset. I had the apple, walnut, raisin, and also a Sephardic, date, figs, apricots with almonds. You put that between two pieces of matzah and bitter herbs. We use beet horseradish mixture. That is called Hillel sandwich. And it is made to look like the mortar between the bricks. And you taste the sweet and the bitter simultaneously. A roasted egg, the only symbol in Passover that carries over to Easter. The Easter egg, the roasted egg, roasted to remind us of the roasted sacrifice. And of course, the egg being the most natural, perfect shape in nature, regeneration, reincarnation. So the symbols are adapted too. We have an orange on the Passover plate. The history behind the orange, going to Susanna Heschel, daughter of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. She once asked an Orthodox rabbi about women becoming ordained. The response was flippant. Women will be on the pulpit when there's an orange on the Passover plate. There is a much, I think, more truthful source that she was once working in a Hillel, the LGBT students concerned about their being ignored, marginalized, suggesting that they put bread crusts on a Passover plate. Obviously, clearly, we don't eat bread. She was concerned that the symbol would be misunderstood. The LGBTQ community should be ignored, prohibited, as is bread. She suggested, let's put the orange on the Passover plate, combining the two stories. The orange represents those who remain marginalized, those who are different and have not yet been integrated into the normative, quote, normative Jewish community. We've also added recently a cup called the Kos Miriam, Miriam's cup. We fill it with water because Miriam was always connected to water, putting Moses in the water, Miriam having a well of spring water. Women at the Passover are empowered and often ignored. So this year, since October 7th, and yesterday was the 200th day since October 7th. 200 days of war and the hostages being kept in what we can not begin to imagine. I opened the Seder by saying this was the most difficult, awkward, painful Seder I've ever led in my career, my life. I am a mystic Kabbalist with gematria. I take Hebrew words and their numeric value because Hebrew letters have numeric value. And I looked up several words from the Bible that are equivalent to the number 200.
Such
And
as?
that's how I introduce Enechem from Genesis, their eyes. There are things we saw on October 7th we can't unsee. There are elements of anti Semitism, most recently in Colombia, and things that we cannot unsee. The last word I actually is my name in Hebrew. Yosfim means to continue. We must continue. A question was asked immediately following October 7th. Should we have Simchat Torah? Should we complete the Festival of Tabernacles? My cantor was at our Seder last night, and she said to me, I remember what you told me. We must have services. We must not allow the terrorists to deny us.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday at services, I could not pray Psalms 113 to 118. I could not pray the Hallel. I am just too upset and angry with God to praise God right now in a service. 200 days, the nature of the government notwithstanding. I think the worst day of all this will be when the body bags come back and remains become the cruelest leverage of the Hamas demands. Okay, so I adapted every part of the service. There were many supplements sent out by many organizations, rabbis helping each other, sending each other suggestions. I'm proud. Many people thank me for the Haggadah. I sent you a copy. I'm proud that we could, as a community gathered last night, defy depression, defy fear. The Seder begins with a comment taken from the Babylonian Talmud in Aramaic. A piece of matzah is held up, and you open the door, open the window, and you take the private world out into the public, and you say, Holachma onya, this is the bread of affliction. Let all who are hungry come and eat. After the meal, there's a concluding service. You open the door again, this time for Elijah, the prophet, the harbinger of the messianic hope. And I talked last night about the fact that the service begins with opening the door. And this year, Jews all over the world will hesitate about opening the door. The Haggadah is a diaspora liturgical text, has nothing to do with the biblical setting. Think about the number of times in history where Jews have been afraid of opening the door. And the statement I made last night was Jews and Judaism never, ever allow closed doors. We couldn't, and we shouldn't this year either. Look, you've posted last week's conversation. Were we prescient? We didn't yet know what would happen at Columbia.
Yeah.
We didn't yet imagine Yale. We couldn't imagine a student at Columbia screaming at classmates, October 7th will be your everyday. So, one of the adaptations I took from an online platform, Jews Belong, was 10 plagues. We recount the 10 plagues and we use our fingers to reduce the cups of in our wine. We take 10 drops out of the cup because the rabbis in the Midrash say that as Pharaoh's army was drowned in the Sea of Reeds, the heavenly hosts began to sing. And God said, no, 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 no. There is no celebration while my creation dies. We are constantly caught between those two parts of Leviticus 19:18. Don't bear a grudge and commit revenge. Love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
I had put in 10 plagues of anti Semitism, long, detailed. We don't normally have that, but we needed to break the silence. What Jews Belong said, let's name the elephant in the room. It is very painful to tell the story of redemption and then go around and admit how much we are hated today.
Yeah.
Semitism has become a sociological tag.
Yeah.
To scream at Jews, October 7th will be your everyday. Who says that? Unless you hate the other human being. We're far beyond the issue of academic freedom and First Amendment rights. There needs to be a stated institutional public set of limits because nothing being said to Jews about Jews would be permitted to be said about people of color. It simply wouldn't be allowed. We tell the story, Magid, but the story begins with 4 questions. And the 4 questions are famous. You know them. Why is this night so unlike all other nights, unique in many ways? On all other nights, the bread we eat is chametz, leavened. Matzah on Pesach, all we eat is matzah. On all other nights, the plants we eat are many and diverse. On Pesach, we eat only bitter herbs. On all other nights, we dip herbs. We never dip herbs. We dip not even once. On Pesach, we dip twice. On all other nights, we are sitting up or reclining. And the tradition is you recline during the Seder, even with a pillow, because this was based on a Roman banquet, and only male citizens could be at the banquet, and they reclined. I included some very interesting questions taken from Haggadot of the earliest kibbutzim in Israel in the 1930s and 40s. And here are 4 questions from those original kibbutz Haggadahs. Why do people hate Jews throughout the entire world? Why is there so much bloodshed in the world? How bizarre is this world in this year, in this generation? What happens to people whose consciences are silenced? When will peace reign in our land and in the entire world? On Passover, every Jew is obligated to ask him or herself, when was I born? Where was I born? What historical memories do I carry with me?
Do those
I
questions have?
added that.
Is there an answer to what? Why do people hate
Yeah,
Jews
of
throughout
course
this?
not. No, no. The nature of the Seder is to provoke questions. And I said at the beginning of hold on just one sec. I said at the beginning of our Seder, look, there are many opinions around this table, but I only want questions tonight. Jason.
Yes.
Oh, I couldn't see you. Somehow you fell off the screen. Okay, so I only provoked questions. I was fearful, and my wife and I talked about the many different positions of people we were inviting. So I
Mm-hmm.
said, no opinions tonight, save opinions for another evening, questions tonight.
Okay.
And the Seder is built for questions. But those questions at kibbutzim, Haggadahs, they are, my God, they're immediate. They don't come from the 30s and 40s. That is one of the great liturgical talents of the Jewish people.
Hmm.
The Second Temple is destroyed by Rome in the year 70. And we recreate an entire new religion, synagogue, house of gathering. Let's have a worship service. We move from animal sacrifice to worship service.
Yeah.
No longer priests or prophets, now rabbis who constantly recreate in God's name with the authority of the quote written law an entire new identity of observance. Passover is the best example of that. As I said at the beginning, there is only one Passover, and that is for the 10th plague. Everything else is somehow a retelling of that event. And then, of course, Christianity comes along and it is linked with Passover. Now, what do we do? So, I adapted many things last night. One, at the last minute, a friend sent a new idea about Elijah's cup, that Elijah was exhausted. Elijah was with the hostages and praying to the heavens above for the freedom of the hostages. Elijah's not visiting anyone's Seder tonight. Don't fill the cup. And the cup remains empty. Don't take for granted that Elijah will bring you hope you can't find for yourself. I think some of the people around the table were a little shocked at that. I held up an empty cup that was given to me as a gift that I only use once a year at the Seder. Don't depend on this prophet who brings the hope of the Messiah. You have to find hope for yourself, within yourself, and for your family and community. I concluded the last part of the service, the Nirtza, is how we end. And we say redemption raised the fourth cup, and with this cup, we accept the tasks of justice and tikkun, repair, that still await us. And we honor the purpose of the Jewish people to affirm our covenant with God, who freed us from slavery, and to open doors of hope to all. One of the supplemental readings that came to me was from the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. I want to convince you one day to go there
Okay.
and study there. They have a fabulous interfaith program. And they sent out the following reading from David Grossman,
I mean,
an exceptional Israeli author.
would I have to relearn all of the
David,
biblical Hebrew I've forgotten?
no,
Okay.
it's done in English. I want to read to you what I read last night because of all the additions, adaptations. This is what I want to leave anyone listening to this with. David Grossman writes, hope. I thought over and over again, trying to awaken it inside me. I called to it out loud in Hebrew. Perhaps it speaks Hebrew. Tikva, tikva. I thought about Israel's national anthem, which is called Ha-Tikva, the hope, and speaks of the hope held by Jews for 2,000 years in exile, the hope of one day being able to live in their own country. It was a hope that often kept them alive. Hope is a noun, but it contains a verb that propels it into the future, always to the future, always with forward motion. One could look at hope as a sort of anchor cast from a stifled, desperate existence towards a better, freer future, towards a reality that does not yet exist, which is made up mostly of wishes of imagination. I love that phrase. Wishes of imagination. When the anchor is cast, it holds on to the future and human beings. And sometimes an entire society begin to pull themselves toward it. It is an act of optimism. When we cast this imaginary anchor beyond the concrete arbitrary circumstances, when we dare to hope, we are proving there is still one place in our soul where we are free. A place that no one has been able to suppress. And thanks to this anchor of fearlessness, of freedom, in the souls of those who have hope, they know what the reality of freedom looks like. They also know how crucial it is to fight for it. I think Jews and Christians and Muslims are scriptural monotheistic religious communities in which hope is one of the definitions of being in the presence of God.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have for many years now become polarized communities in which hope has been devastated, ridiculed, erased. I ended the Seder with that and invited those in attendance to stand and sing the Israeli national anthem, Hatikva. Many, many people at the Seder have family living in Israel. What we did was not as a nationalistic song.
Mm-hmm.
We were reminding ourselves that we are individuals, some from Brazil, many visiting from the US, but we are finally, especially at a Seder, we are a community, a people. And we are linked, ideally, with hope. I think Abraham, was filled with hope when he heard the Holy One say, Lech lecha me'artzecha, go forth from your land to a land I will show you. I think Moses, was filled with hope when he stopped and saw a bush on fire but not consumed. Surely the prophets were filled with hope, so much hope that they could rebuke the people's behavior. I think Jesus, of all the teachings, gave us hope beyond being merely a part of the Roman Empire. Muhammad, too, offered hope to a nomadic people living in a desert. I have certainly during COVID become more and more concerned that individuals must do whatever is necessary to sustain hope, create hope. I think each of us, no matter our faith, our secular, our politics, this is what's missing. What did I do today to bring more hope to my life, my family's life? I have children, grandchildren. My grandchildren were running around last night. At one point, I said, I love hearing their voices. I wish they wouldn't compete with me while I'm trying to lead this Seder. This is the oldest sustained liturgical act in religious history. And we keep doing it. This year we did it as an act of resistance, resilience, and solidarity. We didn't do it the same way, but we kept doing it. Reading, thinking, singing, same questions, different questions.
Yeah.
New ideas, but the same final, we're going to read, and then the reading stops. Now what? So I now have 5 more days of not eating bread, eating matzah, not drinking grain alcohol, wondering about, it can't be really 201 days. How is it that in the 21st century there cannot be a mechanism in which the civility of life, what is it that we've done? Am I pro-Palestinian? Someone recently asked. And I said, what do you mean? Pro-Hamas? Pro-ultimate second nation, Palestinian nation? Do you hate Jews because you want Hamas as a liberationist fighting group, not a terrorist eliminationist group? These questions can destroy hope. I wanted our Seder, our Haggadah, adapted, different, to put issues squarely where I believe they belong. You must empower people to do something with their lives, or their religious identity has no meaning.
Yeah. I was thinking about you. So the podcast hosted an event in Charlotte on Monday night in advance of our denomination's general conference. And the segment before our segment was a conversation between three theologians. And I was struck by how there was an African-American activist theologian from North Carolina. I was struck by how the word genocide has become normative in the way that he was using it for those who identify with the left. and just how it and what struck me was just how hard it is to point to or articulate hope when the parameters of the language have been fixed.
John McWhorter, who's an extraordinary rhetorician, he
Mm-hmm.
is a professor of rhetoric, had a magnificent op-ed in the New York Times. He's a professor at Columbia, and the protests, he said, are not for justice. He could no longer have his class because his class required listening, and the sound of the protest made listening impossible.
Hmm.
I don't know why we wound up here. I don't know how many different factors created the calamities we find on our campuses. When I was 17 years old and a freshman at Berkeley, I remember Mario Savio standing on the roof of a car, and what free speech meant has nothing to do with what we're doing now. Nothing. Yes, you should be able to protest, and then, comma, you are expected to be accountable for what that protest is. If you break the law and protest, then you are assuming that you will be arrested, suspended. That's the purpose of the protest. And yes, language has, I don't know what has happened to language. If I ask that theologian, excuse me, you've borrowed a word and now used it in a way in which I cannot retrieve it. Can we talk about that? It's not your word to take, it's your word to share. I don't know if we'll ever get genocide back. I know because I was in his presence when Elie Wiesel bitterly complained about the co opting of the word Holocaust for the pro life movement. So, if we don't mean what we say, now, can we go back and somehow reconstruct a shared discourse? I want to be in the group that demands hope. It is a word we must carefully guard. What do we want that word to mean as parents, as grandparents, as clergy, as people who go and want to pray? What do we hope our faiths will give us? What do we hope to learn in our schools?
So from John McWhorter's op-ed that you mentioned, and this is, I think, a good contrast with what you did last night. He says today's protesters don't hate Israel's government any more than yesterday's hated South Africa's apartheid government, but they have pursued their goals with a markedly different tenor, in part because of the single-mindedness of anti-racist academic culture, and in part because of the influence of iPhones and social media, which inherently encourage a more heightened degree of performance. It is part of the warp and woof of today's protests that they are being recorded from many angles for the world to see. One speaks up. And so I think that's a good point, that the nature of our technology encourages a more radical form, a more aggressive form of protest. And that's a much different thing than you sitting down with 31 people to enact an ancient script in person.
Yes. Um, I had a younger colleague with whom I study every week make me laugh while he laughed at me when I suggested a blog, and he said, "What? No, a TikTok." So, yes, the videos made instantaneously viral, is that discourse? Really, quite seriously, is that discourse? What is the content of that experience as someone trained in rhetoric, as someone committed to reading texts? What is a use of a viral video? I don't know. I'm afraid of it. I worry when my face gets put on a social media platform. I've read how to make sure my grandchildren are not abused by the social media. What will it mean when you go into this important church institutional meeting? Will people be told you cannot take videos of your colleagues when there's to be intimidated that what someone says will then be taken out? Oh, I don't even want to imagine what AI could do to what people are saying. So maybe it's my age, but I hope we could stop and come back direct as we look at each other. What do you mean? And that the question is a sincere request of understanding. I want to know what you mean. Maybe you're using a term I don't understand. Maybe you're using a term to provoke me. What do you mean?
Mm-hmm.
I hope between now and election day, we can stop people from destroying all hope, because both extremes do better in the chaos when hope is not available. I think that's what ultimately the rabbis who developed the Haggadah, the Seder, they understood. You can't ever understand the unique Passover in Egypt. Now, what about the Passover in your time? Yes, there's a cup of Miriam because women necessitate being brought out from the sides, the darkness. An orange, fine. It's not a political statement. It's a statement that we have marginalized groups. Let's physically note that. The old symbols, the new symbols. I the night ended late, but before she went to bed, I talked to Ruthie in Brooklyn, and she asked me to read her a book. And I have books on my bookshelf that she has also. So we can now read books together. We have to share. That's the other word beyond hope. What can we share? You have gifted me with the weekly opportunity to share. I have to ask myself, am I willing to share with people with whom I disagree? Are there limits beyond which I feel it's safe for me to share? Hope and sharing. That's what we did last night. It's an ancient meal made anew. Each culture, different facets of the Ashkenazi, Central Eastern European, the Sephardic, the Western. Okay, we're mixing olives this year, reminding us of Noah's olive orchards in the West Bank that have been destroyed cruelly and criminally by overzealous religious Zionist settlers. Olives. Anyone in Israel shares olives. Let's have the olive as a new shared symbol that we can share physically for peace.
This is an example of a problem we've talked about before. A clergy colleague, sent me a flyer for a United for Israel march on Thursday at Columbia University at 6:30 p.m. And it has 3 people on the poster: Eric Metaxas,
John Hagee.
No, Eric Metaxas, Sean Foicht, and Russell Johnson. I only know one of those 3 people, but the one is enough to disqualify the other 2. And it's just all the wrong friends.
Yeah, and strange times make strange bedfellows. Elise Stefanik is fundamentally not my friend, and yet has been one of the most vocal McCarthy-esque leaders in the congressional hearings on anti-Semitism. Not every, quote, pro-Israel dynamic is shareable. Are the Jewish people being used as part of the strange political culture of our time? No, we don't have to go to that. We don't have to watch it. We don't have to read about it. But we are both. We have to be careful how it's explained. Last Sunday, there was a big demonstration here in Brazil in which there were flags combined, Israeli Brazilian flags combined, because it was a political demonstration by former President Bolsonaro. I had a guest at my table who's in Rio from Houston, and the demonstration was in front of his hotel. Well, Rabbi, what was that about? How could the Israeli flag be combined with the Brazilian flag? Had to carefully talk about that because there were guests at the Seder last night who were pro-Bolsonaro. So, unity with Israel. What does that mean? Not the government Israel. I don't want to be united with this murderous government. United with the people. Which people? First and foremost, the hostages, alive or dead. Hostages' families.
Joseph, can you...
It's a terribly confusing time.
Can you close for us by reciting the Hatikva that you mentioned?
Yes. Kol od balevav penima nefesh Yehudi homia. As long as within written our hearts, the Jewish soul sings. To Zion looks the eye. Our hope is not yet lost. It is 2,000 years old. Liot am chofshi be'artzenu Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim. To be a free people in our land, the land of Zion and Jerusalem.
Amen. It's good to see you.
I will take you and all our listeners to the synagogue during Passover.
Have a good rest of your Passover, and I will see you next week.
Thank you, Jason. God bless.
Amen.